admiration. That's great. But yeah, Father David, thank you for being my advisor and helping me on this journey of discovering that you can indeed write 20 pages on silence. And many, many more. Dr. Tonkiewicz, thank you for your feedback and your help with preparing for this oration, and your feedback on the thesis was very helpful as I prepared, so thank you for being here. And Dr. Grove, thank you for being third panelist here. And I told you, but it will not be 30 minutes of just silence. So I'd like to open up today with a couple of scripture verses that might seem a little bit alarming. It is written, I said, I have resolved to keep watch over my ways, that I may never sin with my tongue. I have put a guard on my mouth. I was silent and was humbled, and I refrained even from good words. And further, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but he restrains his lips is prudent. Now, conversation, speaking, is a good thing. Man, as a rational and social creature, ought to speak. It is part of his nature. However, man can experience an excessive exposure and experience of conversation. There is such a thing as speaking too much, going extreme, and not leaving enough time for being silent. So conversation, though, is a good thing. I am speaking to you right now, but there is a lack of appreciation for silence that is happening nowadays, and refraining even from good words, fasting even from good words at times, even a good conversation, is necessary for success in the spiritual life and for being happy. Now, there are multiple types of noise. Conversation falls under the category of external noise. This is what we hear with our human ears. This is what we hear with our physical ears. And it's kind of like alcohol. It's fine taken moderately, but taken excessively, it can lead to complications. Whereas interior noise is always a bad thing. This is the thing that, your parents tell you, like, don't eat this, don't drink this at all. It's going to poison you, like, permanently. And and examples of this would be a disorder of the passions, a disordered intellect, being unable to focus on an object. And this is what interior silence allows us to do, be attentive. In Divine Liturgy, we hear, wisdom, let us be attentive. And this doesn't just apply for liturgy or mass. This applies also for our interaction with the natural world, our interaction with our own selves, and our interaction with our heavenly creator himself. Dom Paul de Latte describes interior noise as, quote, some souls do not care for external noise, and yet they are never in a state of silence. There is a continuous hubbub of interior talk in exact proportion to their unmortified passions. Later on in this oration, I'll be talking about Augustine, and I know many of you have read it or are currently reading it, and you'll know that his conversion did not happen overnight. There was a lot of deliberating, there was a lot of interior talk within his soul, internal noise, because like Augustine, he had a crazy amount of disordered passions. His mother, Monica, all she was doing was trying to pray for his conversion. She didn't expect he would become a bishop, or let alone one of the most famous theologians of all time. But Augustine had to experience a journey of trying to find this interior silence, this quieting of the passions. And external silence can help lead a soul to experience internal silence. This is why you see many hermits and monks who experience this isolation in a way, not completely, but there is this isolation in a sense where they're eliminating much external noise in order that they may grow closer to their Creator with an ordered soul. Now, what does internal silence do for us? So internal silence is what leads to contemplation. It is this attentiveness of silence, being willing to listen to one, being willing to allow oneself to be moved by a thing that leads to contemplation. And contemplation comes from the Latin word contemplare, which is a deponent verb, meaning to consider carefully. This will be one of the many times I mentioned Latin. The deponent verb has an active sense of meaning and a passive sense of meaning to the word. So when we contemplate an object, when we consider it carefully, there is something being done to us, and there is something that we are doing. We are giving ourselves to an object, and this object is giving something to us. Through contemplation, we desire to know and love a thing. And Joseph Pieper, in his book, Only the Lover Sings, says that through contemplation, we experience, quote, a deeper and more receptive vision, a more intense awareness, a sharper and more discerning understanding, a more patient openness for all things quiet and inconspicuous, an eye for things previously overlooked. Now, this previously overlooked part of this quote is very applicable to our modern times. And I say that because technology, while it's not bad in itself, is creating this barrier between man and contemplation, man's ability to actually be out in nature, studying it and contemplating it, and trying to find through silence something else. Father Francis Bethel, a Benedictine who joined his order out of a desire specifically to have a more deeper richness and external silence, says, quote, "The sensible world is now largely mediated to us through technology. To know the weather, to find our way around town, to do most of our ordinary daily tasks, we attend only to electronic devices that tell us about reality. We know nature through our screens. And while this isn't bad to a certain degree, it is creating a barrier between man and nature. It is a much different thing to actually see something in person rather than just looking it up online. And I'll use the example of if you go to a famous landmark like a basilica in Rome, for example, people will tell you it's a much different experience seeing it in person because you're having a more intimate encounter with the thing. You're having a more intimate encounter with the natural world. And we must remember that. And man tends to often experience living in two worlds at once. And what I mean by that is you see often at the park or things like that, people are listening to music or listening to podcasts or things while they're also maybe like doing some other task. While they're in conversation will be listening to their devices or things. There's this inability to actually be paying attention to someone completely, to actually give someone your undivided attention. And this is the love that is necessary in contemplation, is giving your entire self to the person, being willing to know and love the thing more deeply. Bethel says further that, quote, "Technology dulls our senses. It also takes away our ability to concentrate as we are tossed to and fro. We are pulled away from what we are doing as our phones chime in our pockets. We check text messages while we are in conversation or while we are reading something else." So souls who experience this are not letting themselves embrace the interior silence of the soul. They aren't allowing themselves to actually focus on a thing, being attentive to a thing. And this is something that we need to fix in our society, for without contemplation, we cannot arrive at happiness. And I say that because contemplation of God is what we are aiming for ultimately. And we can contemplate God in three ways. We can contemplate him through nature. This will be the first way I am going to discuss. And I'm going to give a little WCC tribute here. But this is what we do here is we go out into the wilderness. We fast from our phones in order to find God in the wilderness, in order to find him in nature. And St. Anthony the Abbot was an illiterate man. However, people, when they asked about his sanctity, he told them, quote, "My book is the nature of created things, and as often as I have mind to read the words of God, they are at my hand." Anthony understood there is this language that nature communicates to him, one that's without words, one that's not like English, Italian, Latin, Greek, you get the point, all those languages. But this is a language nevertheless. This is a language that God allows us to hear, but not in the way that our physical ears hear, but in the way that our internal ear of the heart, as Benedict Augustine and so many others have referred to it as. In Psalm 19, the psalmist writes that, quote, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament proclaims the work of his hands. Day unto day pours forth speech. Night unto night whispers knowledge. There is no speech, no words, their voice is not heard. A report goes through all the earth. Their messages to the ends of the world." So like I was saying, there's this language that nature communicates to us and ultimately is glorifying its creator. Nature points back to its creator. Nature glorifies he who made it beautiful. And I say beautiful because nature speaks to us through its beauty. Augustine, in his Confessions, describes this beautifully when he is describing his journey to God through contemplating the natural world. He says, quote, "And what is this? I asked the earth, and it answered, I am not he. And whatsoever are therein made the same confession. I asked the sea and the deeps and the creeping things that lived, and they replied, we are not your. I asked the breezy air, and the universal air with its inhabitants answered, Anaximenes was deceived. I am not God. I asked the heavens, the sun, the moon, and the stars, neither say they, are we the God whom you seek. And I answered unto all these things, which stand about the door of my flesh. You have told me concerning my God that you are not he. Tell me something about him. And they exclaimed, and with a loud voice they exclaimed, he made us. My questioning was my observing of them, and their beauty was their reply. So clearly there was an actual conversation going on between Augustine and nature. That'd be kind of weird to be talking with them. But there is this observing of nature. This is his way of saying, hey, you're very beautiful, but where does your beauty come from? And they point to God. And their beauty was their reply. They point back to it, their creator. Now, contemplating nature is something that we ought to bring back into our culture. And so I expect all of our WCC people to go out into the world and encourage this mission. But it is a much higher thing to contemplate ourself. For through this, we can learn even more about God. Augustine says, quote, O Lord, let me know myself so that I may know you. And also another part, he's talking about how he has been looking for God, but God's actually just been inside of him the whole time in a way. And he experiences, as I mentioned earlier, he experiences a difficult journey of this internal noise, this internal conflict that is within him, and that is preventing him from being reunited to the Creator. Latin mention number 2. So the Latin word for religion is religare, which that's where it comes from, and it means to rebind. So Aquinas uses this etymology to explain that man, his mission on earth is to be reunited to his Creator. And only through embracing silence of the soul is man able to experience that fulfillment of that journey to refinding God And contemplation, considering a thing carefully, when we consider ourselves, we realize that we need a Savior. We recognize our frailty, and this is what led Augustine ultimately to finding God again, is realizing that his soul was in desperate need of rest, of finding God, and of allowing him to fix what he has corrupted through sin. So in Book 8 of the Confessions, Augustine mentions how he knows he must turn back to God, but he still is hesitant in some way. He says, quote, "I could still hear the murmuring of those vanities and still unhesitant. And it was as if she, Lady Continent, said, 'Stop your ears against your unclean members, that they may be mortified. They tell you of delights, but not of such delights as the law of the Lord your God tells.' This was the controversy raging in my heart, a controversy about myself, against myself." This internal noise in Augustine's soul has led him to become not the man whom God has meant him to be. This is why it's a conflict of myself against myself. Augustine, on one hand, is a sinful man who is striving to be closer to God, but he also knows that he must be the saint whom God has meant him to be. He is made an imago Dei, but he needs to find that likeness again. He needs to find the ability to be, to have his soul be close to Christ, to have his soul imitate Christ. And this is described beautifully by Father Bethel when he says, "In Jesus and Mary's souls, there was no noise, no disordered passions, no vanity, no wild imagination. Their attention and wills were given totally over to love of the Father and his work." And this is what Augustine must strive to do. He must eliminate this disordered noise from his soul so that he can allow Christ to live in him and allow himself to have a soul that is exactly like Christ, not like that he's God, but like to have a soul that is free from the burden of sin. Augustine, in an earlier part of the Confessions, mentions how, quote, "The house of my soul is too small to receive thee. Let it be enlarged by thee. It is all in ruins. Do thou repair it. There are things in it that must offend thy gaze, I confess and know. But who shall cleanse it? To what other besides thee shall I cry out?" The house of his soul is too small because without interior silence, he is unable to advance in the spiritual life. He is unable to find the silence of attentiveness, the silence that results in contemplation. And to contemplate something, as I said earlier, you have to show that you actually are willing to come to know and love the thing, to actually unite yourself to the thing. So like I was mentioning earlier, with technology, we can't have this barrier between us and what we contemplate. We ought to go out and contemplate it ourselves. And so, as I said earlier, contemplating nature leads us to contemplate God. And likewise, contemplating our soul allows us to study God more carefully and realize that he is our Savior and that we need him. Now, in a sense, we can know and love God through contemplation by considering him directly, although this is a little more confusing because obviously we cannot know everything about God. And with mystery, there's this silence that comes because we cannot explain a mystery with words. That's why it's a mystery, is because there's a sense, there's silence that necessarily accompanies this word, this idea. And our Byzantine brethren do a great job with this because they stress rejoicing in the mystery of God. And many church fathers have written on this. And Cardinal Augustin Goulerand says, quote, "Without silence, we are deprived of mystery. The mystery of God, his incomprehensibility, is the source of joy for every Christian. Every day we rejoice to contemplate an unfathomable God whose mystery will never be exhausted. We are silent because the words by which our soul would fain live cannot be expressed in earthly language." So this mystery of God, this silence that we are enveloping ourselves in when we worship the Creator, is something not to be feared, but rather is something to be cherished. For think about it, without this mystery, without this silence, our religion would merely be man-made. It would not signify that we are truly worshiping a being higher than us. We're worshiping a truly higher being. And that is what is signified by that mystery, is showing that we must humbly acknowledge that we cannot come to know everything about God. But that shouldn't stop us from trying to figure out what we can about God through nature and through contemplating oneself. Father Bethel says, quote, "God is the transcendent beauty where all riches are present in the absolute one." And this is what contemplation allows us to do. It is to find this ultimate beauty by going out and seeing beautiful things in the natural world around us. So seeing like a waterfall, but then also seeing the frailty of our own soul. But then again, also seeing that we need our Savior to fix what we have corrupted through sin. And so where does happiness fit into all of this? Well, once we come to know and love God more deeply, we are able to find the source of happiness, and this is God. In Veritatis Splendor, John Paul II writes, quote, "The goodness that attracts and at the same time obliges man has its source in God, and indeed is God himself. God alone is worthy of being loved, with all one's heart and with all one's soul and with all one's mind. He is the source of man's happiness." So coming to know and love God with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our mind necessitates the fact that we ought to contemplate God, necessitates the fact that we ought to consider him carefully and show him that we are willing to give him the attention that he so justly deserves. And we, even if we give 100% of our attention, which we ought to, that's not even enough. But God in his mercy has allowed us to be given a great gift. We mustn't let ourselves ignore this gift. We ought to accept it. And so we ought to rest in the glory of God. And this is what Augustine, through his many, many years in the Confessions, when he was married illegitimately, had an illegitimate son, this is what he was missing, was this ability to be silent. At his moment of conversion at the fig tree, Augustine is able to find God and hear the voice tell him, "Tolle et lege," take and read the scriptures. But he couldn't do that until he considered himself, until he realized that he was in a state of sin. And Augustine seemed fine maybe on the outside, looking with your physical eyes and hearing with your physical ears, but on the inside, he was a very broken man and needed to change his life and habits. He needed to cultivate good habits. And only through interior silence is man going to be able to experience that ability to conform your habits to that of Christ. And so we must allow Christ to live in ourselves, and we must allow him to dwell in our very inmost being, because only then will we actually have this true happiness, and only then will we find true rest in him. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. You mentioned that the Latin verb for contemplation is deponent verb with active and passive dimensions.
Yeah.
You spoke a great deal about the active side of contemplation as something that we cultivate, something that we do. You did also mention, especially through some of the words of St. Augustine, that's something that has to be accomplished in us because in the end it's beyond us.
Yes.
The Greek word for it, of course, is theoria. Theos and orao, to see God.
To see God. That's beautiful.
And I think of the French peasant, I think it was Francois Chavagnon was his name.
That would be French.
In the Paris, yes. I don't know if I pronounced the last name right. But
I don't know if I pronounced one of those names right. Mine either.
But he was the parishioner of the Cure d'Ars, John Vianney.
Okay.
Who, the men in the parish there lived in the town, and they farmed their lands outside of town, so they'd go out every morning with their hoes and shovels and come back every evening. And one day, Francois went out in the morning with the rest of his fellow townsmen, except he didn't show up in his field, and they didn't know where he was until someone noticed on the way back that he'd left his hoe propped up against the wall of the church. And they went in, found that he'd been in there all day. And the Cure d'Ars was there also. And the Father John asked him, "What were you doing here all day?" And he said, and probably many of you have heard this account, "I was looking at the good God, and the good God was looking at me."
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I wonder if you might say a little bit more about this passive dimension.
Yeah. So
that we don't have an inherent capacity for, that must be given us.
Right. Because yes, even if you actively try and contemplate a thing, nothing's going to actually be accomplished unless that passive thing is being done to you. And so, yeah, that's an interesting story. I think also St. Isidore, the farmer, also had a similar experience with that. But that's a story for not another oration, but another day. This is my only one. I will not be here all week. Yeah, so seeing God, and this is very interesting because clearly we are not, most of us have not seen the beatific vision yet, but God willing, we all will. But here on earth, when we actively contemplate a thing, when we actively contemplate God, I'll talk about God specifically, there is this thing that's happening to us. And I would say that it is an overflowing of God's mercy. It's an experience of spiritual growth because we, in a sense, are being virtuous, but it is only through God that we are being virtuous. It is only, what's that St. Paul say? It is Christ who lives in me. And so having this contemplation that is experienced, that you do actively, leads to this experience of having Christ live in you. So, and of seeing God, something like that.
Many of the fathers, desert fathers and mothers, spoke of meditation as something that was inherently connected to the memory. The memory is a faculty that has suffered greatly in modern times, so that it seems like that most of us even have trouble utilizing it.
Right. Yes.
Do you think there's a connection between that and the absence of internal silence.
Yes, I definitely no, like for sure. Because I was going to mention this actually, but when I was talking about technology, it's affecting like our attention spans. It's also affecting our ability to remember things. It's affecting our ability to remember. And when I was saying with contemplation, it shows that we are kind of willing to understand an object, and we're giving ourselves to try and let this object be known and loved by us. I would also say we are also trying to store it into our memory. We are trying to experience it, but not just once, because through memory, we can experience a thing multiple times. And this can help you know more about God by like contemplating nature. For example, maybe you keep remembering like a beautiful tree or a beautiful waterfall, and this helps you in your experience of having this contemplative spirit.
Thank you. Fellow panelists.
When you talk about contemplating oneself, now, are you really just sort of focusing on your internal noise and sinfulness, or is there more to it than that? I mean, I think
Yes.
the psalmist who says, I praise you, God, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I mean, he was not thinking bad things about himself. He was thinking good things about the Creator.
At least in the Masoretic text.
Oh,
In the Septuagint, I praise you, for you are wonderful.
okay, well.
Oh, interesting.
Sorry.
No, but that's a good.
So could you say more about contemplating oneself?
Yes. So that is a good point. So you don't only contemplate the restlessness in your soul. You don't only say, "Oh, I'm so messed up. I need a creator to help me," but you also contemplate yourself in the sense of your whole body, of your whole person. You're kind of, I guess, for example, you're paying attention to for example, your intellect, cultivating your intellect. And I would say perhaps contemplating yourself can also mean contemplating yourself like through enriching your intellect and through finding an increase in knowledge through but then also, yes, realizing that you are beautifully made and that you are indeed made in the image of God. And this is something that having interior silence kind of helps you to recognize, that is realizing that your soul is called to that state that it used to be in when it was in conformity with Jesus's soul, when it was similar to Jesus's soul, but only through contemplating ourselves, through like realizing that we are disordered can we realize that. But then also, once we like fix ourselves and cultivate virtue, yes, we can contemplate ourselves with our virtuous acts. We can and cultivate our intellect.
I found the series of quotes from Father Bethel particularly intriguing in light of the fact that a little less than 2 years ago, I was visiting Clear Creek and was having a conversation with Father Bethel after Mass one morning, and in an interesting and wide-ranging conversation, he found occasion to complain with some annoyance that his own monks, over whom he stands as prior and has their obedience, some of his own monks showed too much of a tendency to run to the internet to get information on how to fix a broken tractor or to weld something or whatever. They were using it in the best possible way, but he was just annoyed as heck that they thought of the screen right away instead of just, I don't know, consulting with one another.
Yeah, no, that's
That's just an aside, but anyhow.
Yeah. Well,
My question is, my first question is, why did you say that of the three means of moving towards happiness through contemplation, that contemplating ourself is better than contemplating nature?
yes. So
Why better? That's all.
yeah, no, right. So I was thinking that since humanity is at the pinnacle of creation, what was created during the 6 days of creation, we realize that we can figure that out, yeah, humans are more superior than like
That
a
makes
tree,
sense.
for example.
Yeah. So
Um,
that is a loftier object of contemplation.
Mhm.
And
And-
perhaps also we know it best.
And also, if you see people all the time who like study nature but don't study their own selves,
Mhm.
and I think that, yeah. So
Two other quick questions. I get that that we do not have the prerogative of communicating with one another in silence, although on occasion we have an experience of a communication that's
Mhm.
transcends words.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those we've loved and known for a very long time. The meaningful look, right? I also get that we have to be actively silent, actively passive in respect of hearing what God has to say to us. My question is, in speaking to God, I know that prayer begins with God, but it is nonetheless, we are also doing it. We're secondary causes.
Mm.
Is it good or better or not so good for us to speak to God in words?
No, that's a great question, and I talk about that on my thesis. So when we speak in words to God, these words are conducive to interior silence. So clearly they're not examples of external silence, but they nevertheless, because you don't necessarily always need external silence in order to grow in your interior silence, but it nevertheless helps at times. But yes, there is a extreme of where you could experience too much exterior silence and you're not actually speaking to God.
So you're saying that we have to use words, at least at the earlier stages of prayer, to which I, for one, will be forever condemned. Not because it's the most perfect, but in a way because it's the beginning. And if we advance far enough in prayer, our words spoken to God will be a vehicle whereby we achieve a wordless communication with God.
That's a good question. I would hesitate to say that I am saying that communication or prayer through words is less superior to prayer through silence, because I think when you're praying the Our Father, for example, you aren't just saying words, you are also having this interior attentiveness in your soul. Yeah.
And my final question regarding the quote under section 1, number 4 from Father Delat. What would it allow such a man, granted he's very a seasoned judge of character and a director of souls, what would enable him to infer that there is a continuous hubbub of interior talk in some souls? What are the signs that would tell him that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say when he says after interior talk in exact proportion to their unmortified passions, I would say a very good indicator of that is this. Well, also I would say a good indicator of that is the spiritual restlessness that Augustine feels, and just this lack of this lack of rest.
Yeah.
Something like that. Julian.
Okay, so just kind of following up on Dr. Grove's question, is a key factor of internal silencing or cutting off internal monologue?
If it is not conducive to reverence, so if it's like, not prayer, then yes, it would be something that you would have to eliminate in order to pray properly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Miley.
I kind of wanted to tie the idea of active passivity to your idea of attention. I'm obsessed with the idea of attention, and Dr. Grove's quote from Simone Weil: "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." One rare, silence seems to be dying in our day and age.
Yes.
I'm curious. It's like a hollowing out to the self to receive someone else. And I was kind of wondering if we're correlating attention to silence, if it seems like attentiveness is a hollowing out of the self and a silencing of the self, but actually a transcendent sort of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that. Yeah. So there's a beautiful quote, I think it's from Mother Teresa, but dying to self means becoming alive to others. And so I think that relates a lot to what you said, is dying to self can mean, I don't want to say killing your interior talk that is not reverent, and being able to grow closer to what you're trying to pay attention to by becoming alive to it. And then, sorry, what was the second part? Like what you said?
It's kind of like, is it a way to kind of achieve I don't know, eternal word or whatever, like kind of like I'm having a conversation physically speaking or even like internally dialoguing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just in silence.
Yes.
Silence maybe like, one of the words of eternity.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like maybe eternity has a polyphony or something nice like that, but yeah, is silence a transcendence of conversation?
Yes. So silence is something that is kind of seen as being an eternal language. In the Confessions, Augustine talks about how God his true voice cannot be like what we think of as voice, because that voice ceases to be and it starts at a point. So it's in time. So yes, so silence is an eternal experience, an eternal conversation with God, for it never ceases, nor like it's always been around. So also, I think also in relation to that would be rejoicing in the mystery of God. Rejoicing through that attentive silence, I think relates to what you said. Olden.
Is there a certain order that we should follow? Because you have the contemplation of God through nature and then the contemplation of God through oneself.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like an order you should follow? For example, like nature before you contemplate yourself? Because it just seems kind of weird. How does contemplating yourself help at all if you're very disordered on the inside and there is noise? It just seems like it would lead you farther astray.
You're saying contemplating yourself while you have interior noise would lead you astray?
Because it seems like part of the reason contemplation is it does lead us to happiness is because we're looking at something beautiful that reflects God's goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're looking at something extremely disordered or just even slightly disordered, which I'm assuming a lot of times is like our interior lives.
Yes.
How does that help us?
Right. So when I referenced Augustine's journey, he realized, yes, he was very disordered and restless in his soul. But he also, through contemplating himself, he realized that he needed to find rest so good can come out of bad. So out of those disordered passions came the desire to realign his soul with what it used to be. So because when I was talking about the etymology of religion being religare, it's this rebinding of oneself to God. So it's restoring what you have lost. And so it's not seeing yourself as disordered. It's not only that, it's also seeing that you were something great before.
Before what?
Before he was corrupted by sin. Man was great before. So like in the Garden of Eden, for example.
Oh, okay.
I
wasn't there.
I wasn't either. But did I answer it, or do you want more? Because I think when you were mentioning also like what order do we undergo this process for contemplation, I would say that you don't need to contemplate nature in order to arrive at contemplating yourself. But I am showing that they both lead to God. So it's not like contemplating nature leads to contemplation of oneself, which leads to God. It's contemplation of nature points to God. Contemplation of oneself points to God. And contemplation of God is contemplation of God. Michael.
Returning to quote 11, in which Augustine imagines the conversation with nature, contemplating nature, in which nature ultimately tells him through his observing it that God made it. Can you please explain exactly what goes on when you contemplate nature? Because
Mhm.
what I'm getting at is that it seems that when we talk about coming to a better understanding of God through nature, we're not truly contemplating nature, but merely using it as like a quick
Mhm.
stepping stone to remind us of God's existence and then contemplating God.
Mhm.
So, yeah, what is the contemplation of nature and what happens to the human soul when we engage in that?
Yeah, it's a good clarification, is that contemplating nature is ordered towards contemplation of God. Yeah, contemplation in nature is when we are looking at nature, when we are studying it, it is allowing ourselves to like be moved by the beauty of it. So like, for example, if we see like a beautiful like waterfall or beautiful sunset or something, contemplating it is, and that's what I would say would apply to the passive sense of the meaning is of contemplation, is allowing nature's beauty to move you. And only, yeah, through observing it is that able to happen.
Little insertion. I noticed that we are doing what has become very common in modern times in our use of the word nature, to refer to creation as nature, which neither the scriptures nor the fathers do. They speak of creation, but when they use the word nature, they do it in a more philosophical, theological sense, that there is the angelic nature, there is the human nature, there is the divine nature, there is the nature of animals and plants and so forth. But I think that we have perhaps unwittingly adopted a rather rationalistic notion that there's something called nature. It's all you have to do is stick in Mother Nature. You have Father God up here and Mother Nature down there. Be careful. It's the slippery slope to many things.
Damien.
I would like to push back for a moment on what you said to Dr. Grove about vocal prayers like the Our Father not necessarily being better than sort of a contemplation. And what you said, I believe, is that when you're saying the words of the Our Father, you're still sort of meditating in your heart upon the words and sort of having that silent communication with God through the external words sort of inspiring you.
Yes.
It seems to me that although there is always a place for vocal prayer, like the Our Father or Hail Mary or these prayers that are given to us, and these sort of formulaic prayers, it seems to me that contemplation or simply meditating with the Lord might have a step higher. And how I don't know, a brief analogy is, when your father teaches a little kid to talk, the father doesn't just want the little kid to repeat the words after him, He wants his child to start to try and speak on his own and communicate on his own and sort of that's how there's sort of this relationship built up between the father and his child, The child doesn't just repeat the words of the father. And so I'm just wondering, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that relates to what Miley and I were talking about, is the language of that, like loving silence, of that seeing God through contemplation. It would be perhaps better in the sense that is what I imagine we will be doing more of in heaven, is this eternal, silent seeing of God through seeing the beatific vision. So perhaps through having just that silent contemplation and no vocal prayer, we are allowing ourselves to have that immersion into eternity, while vocal prayer is perhaps more in time than this contemplation of God, perhaps.
So more necessary and better for us now, but ultimately perhaps not necessary.
Perhaps, yes.
We don't know what heaven's like. But.
Yeah, but that's it. But I like that idea, is this leading of, this pilgrimage from a prayer of time to a prayer of eternity. Something like that. David.
In relation to the question Damien asked, have you, for your thesis or oration, studied any of St. John of the Cross or St. Teresa of Avila? What
I've
comes to mind-
studied some of John of the Cross, yes.
Okay, what comes to mind is the Interior Castle by Teresa of Avila, which talks about vocal prayer being the lowest level, and then above that is mental prayer, and then other levels of silence as one gets closer to God.
Yes.
But if you didn't study that specifically, I won't push you on that.
Yeah.
But with John of the Cross in mind, do you have any thoughts about his teaching about contemplation and mental prayer and vocal prayer?
Yes. So he says that the Lord speaks to us in the language of silence. This is how he communicates to us, is through silence, this eternal silence. And yes, and also in relation to what you were saying about the interior castle, I think I would be inclined, after this little discussion that I've had with some of you right now, that finding God through silent prayer is something that is more helpful. It points more to our state of prayer in heaven, it seems. And this eternal silence of the Father is something that we are allowing ourselves to be immersed in. And a communication that doesn't need words, because it is I was reading something, I think from Cardinal Sarah on silence, where he was talking about how we should arrive at a point with God where, and this would be in heaven, is we no longer need human words to communicate with him, but we have just this, kind of what Dr. Grove is saying, is after coming to know someone, you can kind of have this like silent dialogue with them and kind of discover something through like their facial expressions or things like that. And yeah.
What would you say to the rather abundant number of descriptions of the celestial glory as consisting of singing and feasting? And
Yes.
such?
No, good question. I was expecting that actually. So yes. So if you went to Florian's oration, you'll know that song is a very important part of prayer, because when we sing to God, we are praising him. And yes, this presence of praise is quite necessary in heaven, I'm sure, as it is down here. But I would say, like I was saying with vocal prayer, is even with that, you still have this attentive silence, this interior silence. And external, like I was saying earlier, external silence, that would be very depressing if heaven was just all external silence. If we didn't hear anything, we wouldn't hear any
Is that what the
rejoicing.
case sounds like? It might as well be dematerialized, which is certainly not the teaching of the church.
Certainly not. Yeah.
No, I would like to tag on to what Father just said, because I did want to go back in that direction.
Yeah.
Having talked about how there's some hint of our ability to transcend the limits of our own matter and communicate with each other, I also want us to imagine just, you're walking down a street in Nazareth and you're lost. You walk into the wrong house and there's 3 people sitting at dinner there. Yeshua, Miriam, and Joseph, and are they going to just look up at you with love-filled gazes, or are they going to say, "Hi, welcome"? Or
Yeah. So I think with So I think with
something a little creepy about it.
No, right? No, yeah.
Not talking.
So I think the only not creepy silent encounter that we can always have would be with God. Like with humans interacting with each other, yes, like I was saying, conversation is necessary for us, and we just can't communicate solely by looking at each other. It's just, but yes, I would say that just like how conversing with God is different from conversing with man, similarly, your silent communication with God would be different from your silent communication with man. There is this experience of, where it's not awkward, Because yes, you're right. That would be pretty awkward if that was. Yeah, that would also be pretty depressing. Yeah.
I don't know of any of the great masters of prayer, ancient or modern, who would say that vocal prayer is something we graduate from and get out of.
Yeah, I don't
That's,
like that. Yeah. But yes, because I do think vocal prayer is still necessary in our spiritual life. But it's a little hard just because, I don't have experiential knowledge of heaven. So, but it would be nice. But we hope we all will. But yes, I would agree. I would be inclined to agree that there is not this graduation from vocal prayer. That in heaven we still do praise God with our voices, and we will be given our bodies back at the resurrection of the body. And I think that, we still have the ability to speak, perhaps.
I would even wonder, this is really going out on a limb, out of my depth, but in keeping with the post-Franciscan, I mean Saint Francis, not the recent Pope, post-Franciscan willingness of Christians to look at nature in its goodness, by way of definitively putting away any Manichaean tendency. I just wonder if maybe the value of verbal language, audible language, whether there isn't room for the church to rediscover that. Maybe, I don't know. That's a question for somebody who studied the fathers and so on. Do we have to move continuously in the direction of much words bad, as in my attempt to frame this question right now, or is it possible that we'll rediscover that language properly disciplined and modulated is good? I don't know.
That's interesting.
It is time. Wander off someplace.